Hello, my fellow geeks. Welcome to the Indian AvGeek, and I am Vishal Mehra. Last week, after the Civil Aviation Ministry's push, the Indian Parliament passed a bill aimed at ratifying the Cape Town Convention. We spoke at length with Alok Anand, the founder and chairman of Acumen Aviation, last week. The topic is so vast that so much of it wasn't covered in one episode. So we requested Alok to come back, and here he is. Great to hear from you again, Alok.
Thank you, Vishal. Pleasure to be here again.
Continuing our chat from last week, what do you think are the key drivers behind the growth of the aircraft leasing industry, especially in emerging markets like India, Alok?
The number one obvious factor is demand for air travel is growing continuously. Like taking an example of India, uh, as we all know, as frequent flyers, I'll say you and I, for example, and others whom we know in our industry who fly a lot. Airports are full. All flights are almost full. I don't remember last when I flew on an aircraft where I saw too many empty seats. Maybe once in a while, I see a few empty seats here and there, once in a while. But the airports are jam-packed. It's a very interesting thing. So the the whole acquisition for of Tata Group of Air India, I know people keep on seeing the Air India has gone back home. While all that sounds good, but in a nutshell, Tata Group has invested in Air India for a good business reason. They're betting big on Indian aviation, and this is why they're doing it. They're seeing that there is an emerging class of travelers. There are more and more people, as you know, every year moving into middle class and highly aspirational who want to fly. People look at flying still as an aspiration. And also, in fairness, for a business person like me or people who work in companies like me, it's a time saver also. I would much rather fly than travel on a train, especially when I'm on a business trip. And this is true for all emerging markets. A great example is Indonesia. Indonesia is having another unique thing that they are a group of islands, a big cluster of islands. So they even are more dependent on aviation than even India is. So over there also even for last many years since I've been going there, airports are full, jam-packed, airlines are full, all the airplanes are full. And this is what is happening. China, I was recently there in few months back, same thing. So as long as the airlines will continue to grow, people, emerging markets like ours, where more people are entering the middle class who want to fly, the demand for airplanes and for aircraft leasing will just continue to grow because one of the challenges which also stays with emerging markets like India is cost of capital and cost of direct acquisition of an aircraft is quite prohibitive. And it's not got from an airline's point of view, it is not a good business case to own airplanes. It's always better to lease, I think, because it frees up capital for the other activities.
How would an asset manager like Acumen Aviation assess the profitability and risk involved in leasing aircraft to airlines?
So when a lessor or investor wants to lease an airplane to an airline, they would normally involve us to do what is called a tech and ops review. The lessor would also carry out a credit worthiness review, but that I think they do it on their own through their own analyst or their commercial team. But a very critical part of this review is tech and ops. What we do is we visit the airlines, especially if there are new airlines coming up, startup, etc. They are especially put through more detailed scrutiny. And we have a ready reference of best practices in the industry, which are used for operating an airline's tech and ops system. And then we do a walk around in the premises. We ask certain questions. We collect documents. Certain documents are collected. Then they are also analyzed by us. And on that basis, we provide a recommendation report to our client, which is a lessor or the bank in this case, where we will let them know that, in our opinion, which are the shortcomings and which are the strengths. Case to case basis, not always. we are also requested to give our opinion. So remember, our remit is to give facts normally, not opinion. Sometimes the investor or client will ask, "Fine, this is all good. What is your opinion? Would you lease an airplane to them? If yes, why? And if not, why not?" In that case, we give our opinion as well if they ask for it. That is how this analysis is carried out. Sometimes what happens is you come across an airline which tells you that there are certain things they have carried out, but there are certain shortcomings which are they are aware of and they are fixing over next few months. In that case, the lessor or bank may decide, okay, I'll lease you the aircraft, but guess what? Conditions subsequent in 3 months or 6 months, as you promised, my auditor or my inspector from Acumen will revisit you, and you need to make sure you fulfill your promises of doing this. And that then becomes a part of the lease agreement. And failure to carry that out could be constituted legally as a default of the lease.
Right. Has the financing landscape changed for airlines post pandemic? And what trends do you foresee in the near future?
Pandemic brought in very serious challenges where airplanes got grounded. So fortunately, in India, what happened was right during the peak of the pandemic, the Air India acquisition took place. So that kind of managed to offset the negativity which could have set in the Indian aviation. I don't know how that it's like the perfect solution to the perfect problem came at the same time in Indian aviation. And we were right in the middle of it. Full disclaimer in that process, but uh, uh, because of that, that has managed to overcome certain financing challenges because definitely the Indian banks are currently showing appetite to finance airlines, though somebody can argue they've always been doing it on balance sheet basis. And that is why we heard about banks having exposure to Kingfisher or Jet Airways, for example, right? That means the banks were lending to these airlines. Even now they're lending it. So what has changed? I really can't say in terms of lending terms, if anything much has changed because they're still lending only on balance sheet strength basis. However, with the whole GIFT City and IFSC initiative, one thing I'm seeing is the bank are increasingly showing a willingness to at least try and understand the aircraft financing and leasing business. And looks like it's a matter of time before some bank really steps up and starts getting involved in operating lease space also.
Alok, you were just talking about the strength of the balance sheet, right? Makes me think there are so many conglomerates with strong balance sheets. If you look at the Indian commercial aviation, we are almost a duopoly right now. Do you think there is an opportunity for these strong business houses to get into the sector and for a new airline or new airlines to be launched?
See, the airline space, because I'm myself advocating that we still have a lot of growth to happen. And you have, in the last episode, you have given a interesting statistic you have shared that like roughly only 50 million Indians have flown so far. 950 million or so yet to fly, who are eligible to fly or yet to get on the aircraft. So that automatically means that yes, there is space for more airlines to come in because just two airlines will not be able to get enough airplanes. Definitely it's a highly capital intensive industry, so it will be better if industrial houses with deep pockets get into it. There's no doubt about that. But also we must remember one thing. See, airlines is a unforgiving industry when it comes to getting the basics right. This is the reason Indigo has thrived and grown the way it has. So I have never spoken about it much, but in your last couple of questions back, you asked me how an airline is assessed when an aircraft is leased to them.
Right.
Coincidentally, when Indigo was totally new in the market, I was appointed by some lessors to assess them in their very early years. Some people I met in Indigo at that time are still working there, even today. And I came out very impressed. I had a reputation for being a very cynical inspector and very stringent in my reporting. but I gave them very good remarks in their favor, and I submitted to my clients. And my client called me and he says, "Are you sure that they are this good as you are making them out to be?" I said, "Yeah, they are pretty good in my opinion, what I've seen." And touchwood, what I forecasted or what I analyzed turned out to be true. History has shown that they have turned out to be a very good airline so far. Now, however, not one airline I have ever analyzed in India, and I've analyzed quite a few over last few years and overseas also. In India, at least, I have yet to come across even one airline who are close to them at all in terms of operating efficiency. Now, what they are doing today, what problems they're facing today, I'm not commenting on. I'm no more close to action in that sense now, personally. But when it comes to getting the basics right, that is where Indian market can grow, more airlines can thrive, only if they focus on the basics to get them right first. If they think that it is about buying airplanes, filling in the airplanes, hiring pilots and engineers, that is something which all airlines do. But you have to really make profits. You have to get your basics efficiencies right. You have to have the right kind of contracts, right kind of operating model, right kind of pricing model. You have to carefully select and choose routes. There are a lot of things which go into it, which are specialized. And what Indigo did right is they got the right kind of experts to do the right kind of thing. They brought in the best in the market and then they let them do their own thing. They didn't let it become an owner's whims and fancy driven airlines. In the past, there have been certain airlines like that who have been accused of that. I have had a I would say I've had a ringside view of some of them. And I tend to agree with the assessment that these airlines were driven by the owner's whims and fancies and they eventually went down. However, Indigo has not done that so far, in my opinion.
That's interesting. Few weeks back, I had Willie Bolter from Indigo, and he was very effusive in his praise for both Rakesh Gangwal and Rahul Bhatia, and how Gangwal was hands on with everything in the airline, and Rahul Bhatia maintained an arm's length, so to say, resulting in a very successful team.
I can give you
Yeah.
I can give you one quick anecdote, if you don't mind me adding one
Please, yes,
anecdote there
yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
about since we are on the topic of Indigo. So I don't know if people in the aviation circle would be aware, but not from outside. When Indigo started, the people they hired to lead their tech ops, flight ops, many those functions, guess from where those people came? They were all ex-Indian Airlines and ex-Air India people. Which is the airline we deride the most in India as being the worst run? Air India and Indian Airlines. But the same people from the same airlines went into Indigo and set up one of the India's best and one of the top among the top 10 world's best airlines have been set up by the same people.
And now the world's most valuable airline, oscillating between 1 and 2 depending on markets and Donald Trump's policy for that day. But we get the point.
Definitely, I have no doubt about it. I totally agree with you. The same people who were running airlines, Air India and Indian Airlines, which were considered the worst for a long time. So that is my point. If so, people we have the skill sets, but if you get the basics right, it can be done. Yeah.
But just to be fair, Alok, Air India engineering has always had a good reputation. The issues have been more with the running of the airline from a product service point of view. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. I'm not talking about specific departments, whether Air India engineering was good or bad. You're right, though Air India engineering has had a good reputation. I 100% agree. But airline as a whole was never considered a flag bearer,
Absolutely.
right? Yeah.
Absolutely. What are the most common types of aircraft leasing arrangements, Alok? In my homework for this chat, I had read about operating leases, I had read about finance leases, and you've mentioned both in various instances. How do they differ in terms of benefits and challenges for both lessors and lessees?
A classic lessor, somebody who's in the business of only aircraft leasing, would normally do mainly operating leasing only. Within operating leasing, There are two, three variations, minor variations are there. Those variations have got to do with how there are certain covenants which are satisfied, like maintenance reserves, etc. Maintenance reserves is what the lessor collects as a value depreciation cost from the airlines, which they then utilize to put the engines or airplanes through further heavy maintenance in the future. Now, our topic is not MR, so I'm not going deep into it, but these are the variations which are there in operating lease in general. The operating lease can be structured through different special purpose vehicles, which are essentially orphan SPVs. If you refer episode one of our discussion, I had mentioned about SPVs set up in India and overseas, the differences briefly. So orphan SPVs are required because the lessors want flexibility in selling and buying airplanes and want to keep a tax optimum structure. And setting up SPVs helps them to achieve that easily. And it also helps them to divest the assets very fast. As far as the airlines is concerned, in operating lease, model works for well for them. They're essentially paying a rent on it's a very simple structure. There's nothing overtly complicated. Once the calculation or the method is agreed on MR, they pay the MR also. Sometimes they don't pay the MR and they do a end of the lease adjustment. This is where I was saying there are variations in different MR payments. Then on top of it, the airlines may be required to pay security deposits depending on their credit worthiness. They may be required to give LCs, letters of credit, or bank guarantees, again, depending on their credit worthiness. They may be more, less, or negligible. This is how purely operating lease works. There is a quiet enjoyment period where the lessor is essentially supposed to let the airline do what they want with the airplane within reason. However, the lessor has a right to regularly carry out a review of the operation of the airlines, their financials, as well as the review of the airplane itself physically. So, a review of the airline, review of the aircraft, that is where we come in most of the time. Also, there is a monthly reporting because invoicing happens monthly, mostly in operating lease. The airline reports utilization of their assets monthly basis in a pre-agreed manner to the lessor. It normally is reviewed by someone like us directly. And we, in that utilization, we can sometimes flag issues. Like we find, suppose we get a report from an airline, they're legally required to report if our engine is still fitted on the airplane or not. If it is not fitted, they have to tell us the reason. Where is our engine gone? Why it has gone? When will it come back? And we can then cross question and ask for more information. For example, this is operating lease in a nutshell. Finance lease is essentially a financing arrangement where a bank gets involved. Typically, a lessor will not be involved. Typically, there may be exceptions to it. So, what happens in a finance lease is that the airline wants an airplane. The airplane is considered as if it is like a home loan, where you are financing a house. The house is in your name, but the bank has a right to it till you pay back the full loan. That is how finance leases. The airline is buying it, but they are getting it financed through a bank. So the bank has rights over the asset till the time the money you owe to the bank is fully paid. That is in a nutshell what a finance lease is. Again, it has its variations depending on the type of the lease you're entering into. And the bank also has a right to continuously review the asset, to visit you or to send someone like us to visit you on a regular basis to make sure that you are fulfilling your obligations of the lease. The reason is aircraft is a mobile asset, and what if the airline is in trouble and after 5 years they decide to terminate the finance lease and give back the airplane? Sometimes they have those provisions available. So the bank wants to make sure the airplane is given back to them in a healthy shape so that they can remarket it easily. So it is not as hands-off as as a housing mortgage, but it is much more hands-off compared to an operating lease. And then the third variation is ACMI, wet leases or damp leases, where They are not done by traditional lessors. They are done by specialized multi AOP holder operators, companies. There are many companies in Europe and America who are a group of different aircraft operating permit holders worldwide. They have different entities operating, and they have off seasons and on seasons through the year. So when they have an off season, their airplanes are lying idle. They would like to give them on a short lease, 6 months, 1 year, 8 months, 4 months. And their preference is to give on a wet lease because number one, the airplane is going on a very short lease. Number two, it allows them to keep their own crew and their staff employed through that period. So the airplane is still flying. Somebody is paying for its flying hours, somebody is paying for your crew, and you're making a small profit on top of it. All the airline is doing through to which you have wet leased it is marketing or selling the seats under their own brand name. That is essentially what Indigo or Air India or SpiceJet, for example, have done recently in the wet leases. They're just selling the seats using their own brand name and code name, but everything else is being done by another airlines.
And apart from wet leasing, is there any other leasing that Air India and Indigo, those guys do?
Normally, an Indigo or Air India would do dry leasing, mostly operating lease, mostly. But they will also do a lot of finance leases. See, a finance leasing is normally done when the cost of operating lease is something they figure in their balance sheet or in their financial calculations is getting prohibitive. They may go for finance lease also. Because doing the finance lease, especially when it comes to wide bodies, see, wide bodies are on a long term. Wide bodies, there's no point of leasing them for a short term mostly.
Correct.
You would normally like to keep them for a long term, given the nature of the airplane. So finance leasing sometimes is preferred. Wide bodies. So this is why you see the A350 leasing, which Air India has recently done. They're mostly all finance lease through the consortium of banks, including HSBC, which has been leading the syndicate. And so those are all 350s they have done on finance lease. So, but if you look at the traditional analysis of an airline operation, dry lease versus uh, uh, a finance lease, the 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 overall wisdom of the market says that for a big operator, as an airline continues to grow, like Indigo is growing now, or Tata or Air India will grow in future, they will be able to do profitable dry leases only to a certain scale. At 50-60% of their once their fleet is at that level, and they may have to then start shifting more actively to finance leases. Because when you do finance leases, you're also creating an asset base for your airlines in a way.
Indigo also does sale and lease back, right? The PLB model.
Yeah. Sale and leaseback is essentially a structure how you acquire the aircraft. It is, yeah, it is. So the leasing structure may still be operating lease or wet lease only. SLB or PLB, if you are an airline, you will call it SLB, sale and leaseback. If you're a lessor, you will call it PLB, purchase and leaseback. So that is, yes, I think Indigo still does that on a very frequent basis. I believe even Akasa is doing it. I know Tata Air India Group is also doing it, but not as much as the others. Yeah, SLB is essentially a means. Most of the low cost carriers in the world have done that. It's a way to generate capital. So what happens is you as an airline will go to the OEM and place a bulk order. Let's say you place an like what Indigo did. You place an order for 500 airplanes. It's like आप जैसे if you are in Delhi, you go to Chandni Chowk, you want to buy in bulk. What you will do? You will negotiate, right? You'll say, give me a wholesale price. You will not pay the MRP. So the same thing, the airline will not agree to pay a list price, and the OEM will give them a massive discount on the order book. So the listed price for an 320, let us say if it is 130 million, the airline may be able to negotiate bulk order on 500 each airplane for 50-60 million each rather than 130, maybe
Right.
less than half. Then
Right.
what they do is they go to the lesser leasing market and say, I have got this slot secured, 500 airplanes. Can you lease me 10 of these? In return, you buy them from me, and they will sell them at a premium, small premium on top of it. Small but meaningful. So I'm just giving example. A 50 million asset, they may sell at 55 million each, for example, to the lessor. So that 5 million is their arbitrage. They made 5 million on each asset now, right? That gives them cash flow. And what the lessor has done is, lessor has acquired an aircraft which was 120, 130 for just 55 million. And the lessor is able to then lease it back to the same airline. They've got a lessee also, a healthy lessee who's going to pay them a lease rental for next 6 years. So they both are benefiting.
So here's a noob sort of question. Why can't a lessor buy directly instead of SLB? Why to pay that 10% premium to that airline when it can presumably go directly to the aircraft manufacturer, negotiate and order? I'm wondering if it's the certainty of having a client airline instead of buying and then start looking for clients, or is it something else that I'm missing?
This is a complex question, but I'll try and answer. One is yes. One, what you're saying is the reason. They get a ready-made uh, client, lessee to lease their airplanes. Also, you must understand that leasing, just because somebody is a lessor, it doesn't mean that they're highly well capitalized. Even they are dependent on markets. They raise funds regularly from market. For them also, it's a challenge to, for example, as a lessor, if they go to the market and they say, I want to raise $3 billion because I want to order 200 airplanes, for example, they will have a challenge in justifying that, because the question will be asked, where will you lease these airplanes and how will you lease so many airplanes in such a competitive market right now? How will you do that? So, it's a risk and reward matrix. They have to carefully balance it, unless they have an extremely strong balance sheet of their own or a network of their own to justify it. There are very few lessors out there who are able to do that. This is why the lessors who are in the top 5 or top 10 only do that mostly. They will have an order book. Even their order book will nowhere be close to an order book of an Indigo, by the way. Their order book may be 100 airplanes, 200 airplanes, maybe at the most 250 airplanes they'll order. They do that sometimes, to your point, but very few lessors do it because it's a balance sheet risk for them also. The preferred method for most other lessors is sale and lease back. In that case, the challenge is they are then dependent some to certain extent on the whims and fancies of the airlines, because if they are doing a deal with Indigo, Indigo will insist on the configuration which works for Indigo, which may not be highly marketable. Though in Indigo's case, their configuration is very simple. It is marketable, but I'm just giving an example. But
Sure,
if you're
sure.
dealing with dealing with an Emirates, that is where the challenge happens. So Emirates has a very particular LOPA and a very particular configuration of the cabin, and the marketability of the assets of Emirates is this is where you will have a challenge. And most of the Emirates airplanes continue with Emirates only for a long time or throughout their lifetime, most of the time. For example, this is one of the reasons why it is so.
Got it. Very interesting. Thank you for
So, yeah,
explaining that. Okay.
yeah. So there are certain nuances, but I've tried to simplify this. Yeah.
What do you think will be the most significant challenge for airlines, aviation sector at large for the next 5 years? What do you foresee?
Supply chain is the biggest challenge we are having right now. We are staring at not just supply chain challenge in terms of products, material, what maybe not be what something people may not be realizing, which I'm seeing firsthand now, supply chain of people also. There are massive people challenges which are there. There is an acute shortage of skilled staff. There is an Even if people are available, what I'm increasingly noticing is that how to get them interested to work in aviation in the manner which airlines want, it's becoming increasingly challenging.
And labor costs would also
I
go up then, right? Because you have a
Definitely,
smaller pool.
definitely,
Yeah.
100%. It is already going up, and the problem is, if you are an airline in India, you are still not able to sell at the price at which you will sell it overseas. Now, again, the counter argument is GDP per capita is different. True. But the lease rate which an airline has to pay in India and Europe is same. The lessor will not lease it to an operator in India on the basis of GDP per capita. They will lease it at their global demand rates only, because they're having some other airline, some other part of the world willing to pay the same USDs. What USDs rate will be paid from an Indian operator also. So, which are the levers which can be controlled then? One is how to maximize the or how to reduce the impact of supply chain issues. And this is where aircraft leasing and finance industry is essential to have homegrown from India. So what is happening? See, what China has done in last 10, 15 years, Vishal, they have grown a industry from scratch there by investing their own capital and people into the aircraft leasing. They did not go overseas and say to other, said to other lessors or banks, come and invest in my country, set up a leasing company here. No, they invested their own capital. They have some of the world's biggest lessors there now. And now they're commanding the market. Now they're commanding the OEMs, come and set up factories here. They're telling the MROs, big MROs, come and set up here. Because they're controlling the top of the pyramid, the financing and leasing. Ultimately, this is the ambition which Indian policymakers have. But they can't achieve it by dependent on overseas to say, come and set up here. Indian capital has to participate, set up this, and this can then help to alleviate many of these supply chain problems also. Because once you do this, once you finance aircraft in India, you become in a commanding position to demand OEMs, MROs, components, many of these things to get set up in India only. That will help a lot. And the future airlines, future airplanes which will be coming, they will benefit a lot. And the cost of operation will heavily come down in comparison to what it is today. Again, that will mean more flying public and benefiting all of us.
And that's something I've been wondering. All airlines, all Indian airlines combined, have about 1,600 aircraft of Boeing and Airbus aircraft on order books. And we don't have a FAL yet. You just touched upon a very important point, how an assembly line won't just come up by itself, right? You need a whole ecosystem to come up with it, including the finance and leasing players. My read is that large conglomerates like a Tata, a Reliance, maybe a Birla, and others, maybe even an Adani, can and possibly have a large outsized role to play, along with major banks like State Bank of India and HDFC.
100%, you're right. See, so far the efforts of the Indian industry, the big industrial houses, has been on the defense side. The supply, the last mile assemblies, the manufacturing. I think Tata Advanced or Aerospace Systems has set up something in Gujarat. There is another helicopter assembly line, I think, which has been set up recently. I think that is in Bangalore, I believe. So these or outside Bangalore. So these ones which are coming up, these are all assembly lines. They are not really manufacturing here, but it is still something better than what was over a decade back. No doubt, it helps. But these are defense focused essentially. So all defense focused manufacturing or supply or assembly lines which are being put together, not civil aviation focused so far. And that is what is required really, civil aviation side. And this is why I'm saying the finance and capital control comes to India. They are the ones, who can then command or who can rather direct or demand more aggressively with the OEMs and others to start setting up shops here. Having said that, it is not simply the matter of that, okay, you have tomorrow an SBI setting up a leasing platform. Overnight, we'll have OEMs coming in and setting up shops here. It requires many other things, definitely. One of the things which touched upon in the last episode was policies. the policy challenges I was telling you, they were not just affecting us, they affect every industry in India. So that is a general problem we are having in Indian industry. Setting up a factory, I know though I don't have one. Speaking to my friends in the industry, I know how challenging it is to set up a factory in India. The approvals, the rules, the policies, the compliances. So like 15, 20 years back, I should tell you the year, 2005, I'm talking about maybe. Yeah, around 20 years, 19 years back. I was in Singapore delivering some airplanes for Air Deccan. And we were at an airport there, which is still in existence, Silater Airport, which is essentially not their main airport. Uh, and there is a special economic zone around that airport, still there. And that time, all the Airbuses or ATRs which were flying in India, their supply chain was sitting in Singapore there. Nacelles, boroscopes, engines, you name it, APUs. Even now, even today, that is the case. 19 years have passed. Nothing has changed in that regard. So we are still, our operators here are heavily dependent on supply chains or shops which have been built in Singapore or regions around Singapore so far.
Well, here's hoping next time we speak, things are on the right runway. I've had a ball talking to you, Alok, and all the incredible knowledge you have shared over the last 2 weeks with all of us. Thank you very much. In fact, this is a great time to plug Alok's own podcast, which is amazing. He has interviewed massive names from the leasing industry. The podcast is called Flight Path with Alok, and it's on all podcast apps as far as I remember, including YouTube and Spotify. So listen to that.
Thank you very much, Vishal. Thank you. And hope I didn't give you too long answers. People, I hope people enjoy it and really appreciate this opportunity. Looking forward to speak to you in future again. Thank you.
I couldn't have asked for a better expert to explain the leasing and asset management part of the business. Thank you very much to Alok for shedding light on this. Next week, one of the aviation world's most respected and well known consultant, analyst, expert, what have you, joins me on a special flight on learning from the past and peering into the future. Listen out for that. Meanwhile, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your fellow app geeks. Alok is at Alok Anand 77 on X, and I am at Vishal Mehra. With that, keep your tray tables up, your seat belts fastened. I wish you well and happy flying, my friends.